Ever had a profound experience in nature where you felt like this is holy ground? This is something sacred. Have you ever had that kind of overwhelmingness? I know you have, so just raise your hand. Give me an example. Have you in Iceland at any time recently experienced God in nature?
Time to relax.
Okay, okay. You were traveling, and that's not easy. Now, I will say Robbie and Leanne just got back. Did you go to Iceland too? So they all just went to Iceland and were recently in a hot pool that like I think there was like a volcano eruption like the day after you left, right?
2 days after.
2 days after you left, where you could have all just died and you would have just boiled to death immediately.
Alarm said you had 15 minutes to get out. Well, the alarm sounded, you had 15 minutes to get out and survive.
So hustle.
Yeah.
So hustle. So you bathe in your running shoes. People say this a lot, and sometimes I believe it, sometimes I don't believe it. People say all kinds of stupid stuff. I say all kinds of stupid stuff, but people tell me all kinds of stupid stuff as though I care. Like people often try to make an excuse where I say, "Oh, I'm an Episcopal priest." They'll say, "Oh, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual." It's like I don't care. Like if you don't go to church, just say like I don't go to church or nothing at all. Like this isn't a shaming thing, right? But one of the things people tell me all the time, it's like, "Well, I don't go to church, but I experience God in nature." And so then if I want to make it real awkward, I'm like, well, tell me about it. How do you experience God in nature? What they mean to say is like, I like being outside. I like being outside. And that's not wrong. That's not wrong. Like very few people say like, oh, I experience God in nature. And so I go to nature and I say my prayers, or I go to nature and I think deep thought. No, I go to nature, I go for a hike, or I go and let my mind wander. But you know what? I support it. I actually think that's more profound than most people intend. As a matter of fact, I think this is, from the church's stance, this has been the primary way where people have experienced God throughout all time in history. You know, there's a great line that we read just the other week on Palm Sunday, where Jesus said, look, they're trying to settle down everyone as he's coming in the triumphal march. He said, even if the crowds weren't here, the stones themselves would cry out for the glory of God. And he's talking about the crowds cheering for Jesus on Palm Sunday as he's the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. But this idea that nature itself cries out the glory of God. You know, one of the questions the children tend to ask, like, you know, if we're saved by Jesus Christ, what about all those people in unreached places who've never heard the gospel or never had access to the gospel? And say, well, talk to my friend Jim Truesdale, because that's his job. And if there's anyone left on this planet, by the time Jim's done, he will have failed. No.
Maybe I should have stayed in the deck.
No. We say, earth itself cries out the glory of God. Creation calls to the creator. And that in these far off places, people have been searching for God because it's hard in all places, in all times, for people to look around and say, there is something more than me. There is something larger than us. And I would say people have gotten it wrong before. I preached on Easter Sunday about Oester, the goddess of springtime, of reproduction, right? And say, well, there is no Oester, but it's not exactly wrong for the Goths and the Visigoths and the barbarians to walk outside in springtime and say, there's something moving and powerful about spring. There's something amazing about the regenerative nature of creation, and that calls to something instinctual in me. And I long to understand it and to give it a name. I mean, this is why Paul goes and he's talking to all the Greeks, and he says, you have yourself a God to the unknown God, and I'm just going to give you a name. Where it's like heart is already looking for this solution, but you don't know. So it's like in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? Where it said the answer. What was the answer? 42. And then they had to go back and say, okay, now what's the question? and the question said, how many roads must a man walk down? But they came to the answer. And same with the Greeks, saying like, we're going to make a statue to this unknown God. They came to the answer. They just didn't know the right question. But I think to people and civilizations around the world, they say, we know the answer. The answer there is something more than us. But we don't have all the questions, and we don't know how to wrap our mind around it.
I wonder if creation is a faithful witness. It's certainly not unambiguous. I mean, there's the same God that they worship in the spring is the same God that would have destroyed them in the dead of winter. And just
Sure.
cold starvation. So,
Sure. They had gods for that too.
so.
Is it a faithful witness in the sense of there are hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and
Well,
volcanoes and
Is it a witness that can stand?
so we'd probably say in the church would say no. That's why Jesus Christ came into the world, because we didn't get it through creation itself by itself. We didn't get it through judges by themselves or prophets by themselves or kings by themselves. So finally God gave up. It's like, I'll just come and do it myself because you're not getting the answers that I've been trying to put out there. But it's the entryway. This is an entryway where it's like, it's hard on a beautiful day when the sun is shining to walk outside and not feel something radiating deeper into your spiritual self. It's hard not to be on that mountaintop, just seeing the Himalayan mountains stretching out forever and not say like, I am overwhelmed, or just by the sea and watch kind of the profoundness of the ocean and just wonder, right? Big questions. Tell me.
That's why I feel like I experienced it through nature, because when we were walking in between the two tectonic plates, it felt creation, that two big, huge. landmasses.
The two continents pushing against each other. Was that in Iceland?
Yeah, I know people say, oh, science is not with God, and I'm just thinking, I just kind of went from creation to what I call like evolution to the point that we're that are smart enough and brains and that can read this and then tell us about it. So I
Yeah.
appreciate it from creation.
It's all part of the same continuum, right? Faith is a spectrum. The revelation of God is a spectrum where God is revealing more and more. And I would say in your own faith journey, you're on a spectrum of belief. So whether you start, so we have a young guy starting as a 2.5-year-old, 3-year-old, he's on his own faith journey. He's learning here and he's going to be growing. And there's some things like you can't unring that bell, where hopefully the more you learn about Christianity, the more you grow into it, but it's a lifelong pursuit. I was just reading about Gregory of Nyssa from the year 400. And in year 400, Gregory of Nyssa writes a lot about, he said, what is the point of life? What is the perfect life? The perfect life is pursuing God, knowing that you can never catch God. He's using Moses as an example. So Moses wants to see God's face, and there's nobody, arguably, that saw more experience of God. But finally, Moses is like, just let me see your face. So he puts Moses in this crevice, covers him up with his hand, and he passes by. Now, in the Sistine Chapel, that's right in the very center of the Sistine Chapel. You see God passing Moses in the glory of God. Unfortunately, Michelangelo chose for God to wear something like God was wearing something like, has anybody ever been to the Sistine Chapel? Yeah. God's wearing something kind of like a hospital gown, where it's not fully closed in the back. So you see like God coming, and you see God passing, and then you see like God's derriere. It's like the back is not sealed. And so right now, think of all the conclave meeting in the Sistine Chapel, but like pursuing God. It's this pursuit of God. That even if I can't ever fully know God, I'm chasing God. I'm like striving after God. I'm longing for more of God. And the closer I get, the more I want to achieve. And maybe this is the spectrum we're talking about.
And he was actually thumbing his nose at the.
Is that what Michelangelo is doing? Well, there you see it. Right in the very center.
Oh, no.
The Pope. Well, go ahead. Yeah.
This reminds me a little bit of something we were listening to in our Holy Biscuits
Oh, yeah.
Wednesday morning thing. Tom's big on mysticism and all of that, so we've been looking into a little, some stuff related to mysticism. And came across this podcast on Eastern Orthodox mysticism. And there was a guy, Gregory of Palamas or something like that. Anyway, he made the distinction. I think one of their themes is that you can't know like the essence of God. So they drew a separation between the essence of God and the energies of God. And I would say that what we're talking about here in the creation aspect is more like the manifestation of the the energies of God.
Mm,
So I thought that was, this whole discussion kind of reminds me of that mystical, Eastern Orthodox thing as well.
lots of Gregories out there.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So the early church kind of knew and understood this, where they said creation is our first experience of God. Creation is our first experience because it's like, it's how we're born and you see light, you open your eyes and you see kind of the grandeur of the world. And so they called this natural theology. Say, it's not the fullness of God. Jesus Christ is the fullness of God. If you want to know the fullness of God's expression in this world, it is through this person, Jesus. But natural theology can be the front door. And you can make a lot worse choices than stepping out into nature and experiencing something holy. Now, we're in a weird place in human evolution, well, in Christian evolution in the year 2025. Not just Christian, but maybe societal. But right now we're in like this weird place where about half the country is really intellectual, right? Where you think of like professors in their ivory towers, or you think of like, oh, you're an elitist class. Like if you're a professor, or if you're, if you're a professor, maybe you're a part of the elitist class. Well, it used to be that the clergy were the elitist class. It used to be that the clergy were the most well-trained people of society. Most likely, if you grew up in England in the 1500s, 1600s, the only person who had any level of education beyond maybe 8th grade was going to be the town clergy person. And that person would have gone all the way through the university. The first universities going back to the University of Paris, the University of Bologna. Now look at props to the Muslims as well. The Muslims also had very early universities dedicated to science and mathematics. But the first universities were all religious orders. They were for the education of clergy and monks. I mean, this is why in part you think of somebody like Martin Luther. Martin Luther was a monk. He was a professor. He was somebody who was writing his own translation from Greek, his own translation from Latin. He was extraordinarily well studied because that's part of what it meant to be a clergy person that you were going to say. So the first universities, like the University of Paris, was founded around the year 1080, something like this. Around, honestly, the same time as the Crusades. So it was like a really busy, fun time. So it's like, you can go study or go kill some people, whatever. But they were started in part as this natural progression of like, if God is in nature, then we should study nature. It's actually a move back towards Aristotle. Y'all remember Aristotle? Aristotle had this way of breaking things down into classifications. And so it's this kind of re-emergence, this love affair with the Aristotelian method of learning, of breaking things down, and saying, let's break things down into their component parts. If the trees call out the glory of God, then let's study the trees. Let's classify the trees and see which trees are related to each other. And let's see how they form and why are there rings within the trees, and what do the rings tell us about the life of the tree or the life cycle. Or if flowers, right? If the lilies of the field are calling out the glory of God, and look how God has provided for them, then let's study the lilies of the field. And so we have all these things that are starting to emerge, like biology, chemistry, botany, astronomy, where you're just looking up at the stars and say, if God created the heavens and the earth, then let's study the stars. So you think of Gregor Mendel. Who was Gregor Mendel? Come on.
The bees.
The peas. He was famously a lousy preacher. He was a monk. He was a avid gardener, though. Like I would say, I wonder if he was on the spectrum somewhere, because to get so involved with your pea plants, you got to have a certain level of devotion or like a certain level of extreme boredom. But you have Gregor Mendel, who was a monk, and he was part of this order, and he was giving himself fully over to it, but he was an avid gardener, and he couldn't quite turn a phrase that was engaging for the congregation, but he studied peas because he's in this process of natural theology, and he learned about genetics, right? And that peas have 4 alleles. Come on. And it starts at the very beginning of genes, and how this kind of pea can produce this kind of pea, or these 2 different pea plants can produce a 3rd kind of pea plant. This is how we get eye colors and all kind of genetic study from there. The same with physics or astronomy, you think of Galileo. Now, famously, some people, you can think of it in two ways. Galileo was famously on house arrest. He died under house arrest. Because what did Galileo teach?
He taught that the earth was not the center of the universe.
Yes, the church is the center of the universe, and the church is everywhere. No, he said, right, that we go around the sun. The church hierarchy had a problem with this, in part because Galileo was inventing math in real time. Galileo is one of those people like Isaac Newton that kind of leapfrog ahead, where it's like, I'm just going to go ahead and create a math that you've never heard of to explain these things that I'm discovering that you can't quite imagine. And the church wasn't quite there, and the church didn't know how to react. So the church, it was a long period of time where they had several trials and lectures, and they're bringing Galileo in and help us understand this new math that you're telling us. Help us understand this new science. But Galileo was never himself divorced from the church. His daughter was a nun, and even on house arrest, he spent most of his life between his house and the nunnery. He invented things like the pendulum clock so that the nuns could wake up consistently on the hour every hour. Before that, it was really hard to keep time accurately. And so they didn't know when they were supposed to wake up to say their prayers. So he said, I'll just invent a pendulum. Why not? And that's why we have grandfather clocks today. But in many ways, Galileo himself was a passionate Christian, trying to discover the glory of God and share that in a way the church couldn't quite wrap its mind around. And the church didn't react somewhat well to that. Right? But these all have their very beginnings through natural theology. Say, if we're going to study something, let's study it in smaller and smaller and smaller components, because there we find God. So today, the first thing Bill said to me as he walked in today, I asked him a question. He said, but if it's like, why should we travel into space? Because if we have the capacity to learn and grow, and that this is part of our creation, then maybe there's some obligation to go and learn as much as we can and study as much as we can. And so it's also this funny thing where Christianity has often abutted science, where you think in the 1920s, where there's a big kind of, does evolution exist? Does it not exist? Say, for most of Christianity, science has helped us understand God better. When we learn more about genomes, when we learn more about physics, when we learn more about the planet's motions, or we learn more about flowers growing, that teaches us something about God. That teaches us something about the interconnectedness of the universe. And maybe it's not that, oh, now I believe in science, so I can't believe in God. It's incompatible. I believe in God because of my understanding of science. Because when I look at the tiny cell structures of an atom, and I look at the patterns of a galaxy, and I see the two mimicking each other, I can see this through line that's connecting one to all things. When I learn about dark matter in the universe, the ways what, like 70% of the universe is dark matter that we can't identify or figure out what it is. And it's like there is this existence of things beyond our understanding for now. And maybe one day we'll learn. And maybe we'll learn more about God through that. Even with medicine. So we have a couple nurses, chemist, doctor. But even in medicine, right? It was started. I mean, the pursuit of medicine, I think, has been an ancient thing. I'm ill and I want to not feel ill. So you go to Louisiana and the Native Americans would chew on, the bark of a certain tree because it had a natural aspirin to it, right? It's like, turns out my headache goes away when I chew on the bark. Fairly rudimentary, but we think of even medicine. One of the primary ways the church has grown and spread throughout the world was through creating hospitals, places for people to recuperate. But then while you're here recuperating, we might as well study and learn what's going on. What's going on before us? You think of the Hospitallers. The Knights Hospitaller. Call back to the Crusades once again. Back in the Crusades, people are dying everywhere. And so we need some people to go and help those who need to convalesce. I think of St. Ignatius. Do y'all remember St. Ignatius? What did St. Ignatius do, Lou? He founded the Jesuits. Founded the Jesuits because he was staunchly non-Christian. He wanted to be a soldier of fortune, wanted to make a bunch of money, kill a bunch of enemies. The first thing that happened was he was standing up on a parapet in Spain. Someone blasted the wall with a cannonball, broke his leg, and now he's convalescing in the nunnery for like months and months. He didn't have anything to read. not Christian, but sister kept bringing him books on the lives of saints. Yeah, I'll read this book. This is the only thing I have. He started reading the Bible. Massive conversion experience, took over the world. You know, Jesuits became one of the most famous orders, especially because of their pursuit of knowledge and education and universities, higher education. Leaning into medicine, you know who was a famous Jesuit? Pope Francis, come on. You people, you of all people, Robbie, you should have had that on the tip of your tongue first. This is like the best day of your life. Like conclave's being called soon, right? You know, Robbie, technically, they've only ever called cardinals to be pope since early 1300s. But technically, any baptized Catholic male could be called up for pope. So while it's not probable, it is possible. I'll see if they'll accept your name. I'll throw it in the hat. Robbie Cyrus. I think of Job. I mean, who's read the book of Job recently? Job complains for 37 chapters. Love it. Why do you say it's the best book in the Bible? Tell me more.
Before I thought I knew him, but now I see him face to face. It's how you come to know. It's lays out how you come to really know God, just want to know that.
Yeah. I think one of the scariest lines in all of scripture is Job's complaining for 37 chapters, and then God shows up and he says, gird up your loins like a man, for I'm about to speak. And it's like, oh no. The last thing I want calling out from a fiery bush is like, gird up your loins. It's like, consider them girded. But then God starts. I mean, what is this? It's not just God speaking, it's poetry. It is like the song of the universe. It is some of the most beautiful lines of scripture. When God speaks back to Job, he says, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. I can't imagine a better sermon than just that. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? This is what I want to tell people when they come and say, I don't believe in God, or I can't believe in a God, or I believe in science, so therefore I don't believe in God. I want to say, where were you when God laid the foundations of the earth? And it's like, and if there is a God that could call into being light itself, if there is a God that is the creative force of the universe, that not only called out the galaxies, but knit you together in your mother's womb, if there's a God of all life, how could you wrap your mind completely around it? How could us in our tiny little fragile state possibly understand the enormity of God? But I like that this is where it begins. Where God begins, he says, where were you? And I'm going to take it to the biggest place possible. Where were you at the beginning of creation? Because I was there. And this is how John starts the gospel, right? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. The Word was God. Like, let's go to the very beginning of all things. And that what John is doing is calling us back to, he's calling us back to the very beginning of Genesis 1. In the beginning. In the beginning. When the face of God, or the Ruach, the Spirit of God, Ruach is like this breath of God, right? That kind of sounds like a good Jewish breathing sound. The Ruach, the Spirit of God hovered over the deep, sometimes over the chaos. He said, let there be light. Now, one of the questions children have is, and you've heard me preach about this before, but one of the questions children have is, if God created all things, who created God? Because that makes sense. Like, if I plant a seed and then the seed grows, well, I planted the seed. And so the tomato comes from somewhere. Everything comes from somewhere. I heard a nurse tell me one time where his son had asked this. And I thought this was like pretty good attempt. Where he said, what we know about energy is that energy doesn't just stop. The energy goes from one source into another, right? You can transfer energy, but it comes from a source. And so if all creation is started through this great energetic experience, the energy is coming from something. But I would say this, we do believe that things can pre-exist. There can be the pre-existence. For instance, we were talking about IVF today. A woman said she's interested in having a child, but she isn't married, and so she wants to go through the process of IVF. And so I would say her love pre-exists. She doesn't have a child, but she already loves a child yet to come. And because of that love that pre-exists the existence of a child, it can actually create, through modern technology, this being within her. The love existed first, and the child is a product of that love. So in the family, before Katie and I had children, we loved each other, but we also knew, even before we got married, even before I met Katie, I knew that I wanted to be married and have a child at some point in life. I knew that that love was already there as a seed in my heart. And so it pre-existed. And so it's not incongruent in my brain that God can pre-exist creation itself, where that God is this force of eternal love. This love can pre-exist and then call forth. Say God is creative, productive, right? That it comes out of him. Does that make sense? Or is that too esoteric? Jim, is that are we too in outer space? Say, you're not supposed to know. There's an answer, but not yet.
It's your favorite. You're like. Another way to look at it is energy can never be created, it can never be destroyed. Energy just simply is.
Energy exists. It can exist in this form and in that form, but it can't be destroyed. I guess, could energy be dissipated? Like if you have a car and it hits a brick wall, it just transforms form. Yeah,
The wall, the energy is absorbed into the wall.
into the wall, into your head flying through the windshield. Yeah. And then God saw that he made all things, and it was good. And there was evening and there was morning on the sixth day. And the creation itself is inherently good. That God made all creation, God is in all creation, and that creation itself is neither good nor bad. The hurricane is neither good nor bad. The tornado is neither good nor bad. It's bad if you build a house in the middle of tundra where the tornado is coming through, or if you build a house on the beach where the hurricane is wiping through. It's bad in that sense that it's affecting you. But the movement of the planet itself is neither good nor bad. That God created it, and it is, right? It is. In the same way, a poisonous snake is neither good nor bad. It may be good to reduce your rat population. It may be bad if you step on it. There's not inherent goodness or badness in either. One of the great writers, y'all read C.S. Lewis, C.S. Lewis Master. We're not allowed in the Episcopal Church to go a Sunday without mentioning C.S. Lewis at least once. It's one of the rules we have. Usually it's Chronicles of Narnia, but he wrote The Problem of Pain. And he talks about, it's a really good question of why do bad things happen to people. It's an exploration of this idea. And so if you ever get wound up about theophany, that's the theology of why do bad things happen. Read The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. But his metaphor is is the hill good or bad? It's like your perspective. If you're walking up the hill, it might feel bad. If you're walking down the hill, it might feel really good. Are mosquitoes good or bad? It's like, well, if you're getting bitten by mosquitoes, maybe they're good. I haven't found any good rationale for why mosquitoes should exist. But surely something eats them. It is good. Like, I don't know, bats eat them, and then we get COVID from bats. So still seems bad. I don't know. But the God rested on the sixth day and said it's good. And it says this not 7 times in the creation story. It is good. It is good. It is good. Now, when something happens repetitive like that, and there's a number attached to it, let's slow down and scribble it and say, what does that number mean? Because numbers are very symbolic to us. Creation is 7 days long. 7 is this perfect number. We're going to see it again and again in the Old Testament. Where it's kind of a holy number. It's a full number. It kind of comes into itself. And on the 8th time, God looks down, sees the man is alone, and he says, it is not good. And that should be poignant in your ears because you're reading this like a poetry slam. It says, and it is good. And he created the birds, and it is good, and the sea, and it is good, and the light is good, and man is alone, and it is not good. So even though man is in God's creation all by himself, in the glory of God, It is perfect. There is no suffering, there's no hunger. You're walking in the presence of God. It is not good that man should be alone. So that even when we're in creation itself, we need something more. Because if man is alone, there's no person to love. He says, I'm going to create for him a helper. It doesn't say a woman, it doesn't say a mother, it doesn't say a maid, it doesn't say, a friend with benefits. It says a helper. Because even in paradise, life is long and lonely, and we need people to walk with us. Whether that's a friend, or a romantic partner, spouse, or a sister, or just a community as a church. This resonating, and we're gonna see this through scripture, that it's not good for us to be alone. And so what is the gift that Jesus leaves to the world? Is the church. When I say the church, I don't mean the Catholic Church or the Episcopal. I mean a community of believers who can hold each other up. It's not good for us to be alone. And so what is the Holy Spirit? It's this gift poured out through community. But we also have to think, when we talk about God and nature, I'll give you like a tour of the geography of Israel. Because it's hard for us maybe to see through the eyes of the early Hebrew people all the way through, Jesus and his contemporaries. Also, I think maybe in Birmingham, Alabama, in the suburbs around St. Thomas, we can live lives somewhat divorced from nature. It's possible. Now, maybe Jim's outside every morning drinking coffee and like absorbing the energy from his zinnias, tomato plants. And maybe you go on hike every day and like can experience the glory of God. But honestly, Alabama, maybe there's some places in the world. Maybe you go to Denver, Colorado, and you wake up every day looking at the Rockies. Maybe you experience more majesty. But these are people of the earth. But the Hebrew people are people of creation, where these are pastoral people, where we're living every day. Our house is designed only as a place to protect us when we go to sleep. It's to protect us in the bad rainstorm, but we're going to spend 98% of our life outside of this house. But nowadays we build houses where we can hang out, where we want to spend most of my time. Yesterday, I almost the whole day off. I spent almost the whole day in my house, right? I did some chores outside, mowed the lawn. That was nice. I had enough of that. Let's read a book. Let's watch TV. Let's cook a meal. Let's be inside. And how radically different it would have been for most of human history, but certainly the Hebrew people. Certainly Hebrews. This is, I think, the Kidron Valley. I guess this is the temple. But anyway, these are pastoral people. Where Abraham was a wanderer from the land of Ur, and Abraham himself is going to walk through almost every section of Israel. He's physically going to walk through it. He's not just going to experience it. Y'all ever heard of the Camino de Santiago? So Camino de Santiago, the road of St. James, it starts, you can start virtually anywhere. You can start in Rome, you can start England if you wanted it. You can start maybe in Iceland and start rowing. But I started in France. Because after I finished the Peace Corps, I didn't have anything. So I put everything that I owned in a backpack, a very small backpack. And I met a friend who was a college professor who had the summer off. And we met in England, and then eventually made our way down to France, and then just started walking. And for 40 days, we walked over the Pyrenees Mountains into Spain, into the south of France, and then we walked across northern Spain for 40 days. We're literally walking through, the Pampas and the great flatlands. You're walking through towns and villages, and you're seeing the earth itself change. And to see even that little portion of Spain, to see every day on foot the earth and how it changed and evolved, and how you're walking out through vineyards. They'd have different fruit trees to help with the vineyards growing, so you'd steal fruit from the different trees, or you walk through a valley, or you walk through these rolling fields. But this is like an everyday lifestyle for pastoral people. And usually shepherds start as young children because it's not that hard to follow the sheep. So it's like from the time you're James's age, and James can walk without crutches, it's like, go take care of the sheep. This is why David, because he's the youngest, is sent out to hang out with the sheep. Saying you're the shepherd because it's easy. Has anybody ever been in a country where there are shepherds? Have you ever seen shepherds at work? Did you notice if they're old men or young children?
Mostly old men, but us.
Mostly old men. What I've seen in many countries is it's the young children. they send out to be the shepherds. Go on, watch the sheep, and then walk back, because go hang out, play with your friends, get in trouble, play in the stream, be around. But what's it like for the Hebrew people who are walking through Israel? These are not seafaring people, even though Israel is right up on the Mediterranean Sea, and there will be big ports. Those ports are built by the Romans, but the people of Israel are not. As a matter of fact, the sea is this thing of great fear. And so you see, especially in the Psalms, water is kind of a scary image, where it's like the boiling, turbulent ocean. I mean, they're terrified of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is a somewhat large lake, right? It can have big waves. For small boats, it can be a lot. But they're not really sea people. The Philistines were seafaring people. And there's some thought that they had been migrants from climate change, where the country they were living in, maybe coming from Greek islands, had been overwhelmed by famine and disease, and they migrated through the sea. For the Hebrew people, the legend was that the Philistines came out of the sea. Probably because they sailed over it, right? But it's like these people emerged from the ocean themselves, and they lived on the banks of the Mediterranean Sea, a place we would now call the Gaza Strip, right? So probably, most likely, they're fleeing as a civilization, end up on the banks of this area, and they're probably more fishermen. But the Israelites, and so even in Revelation, the very end of Revelation, there's a lot of natural images. The very end of Revelation was to say, in God's reign, it will be like a glassy sea, not a single wave. That's terrifying to the Israeli people. But this is why we're going to have a lot of images in Scripture of nature, because nature is pretty profound. You have continental Rift Valley that leads down to the Dead Sea. If you stand on the Mount of Olives, you look in one direction, you're looking at Jerusalem down into the Mediterranean Ocean eventually. If you turn the other way on the Mount of Olives, you look down the continental or the Rift Valley that ends at the Dead Sea, the lowest point on earth. And it's gorgeous in its own barren desert. Has anybody ever read Desert Solitude? It's like a long form poem about the beauty of the desert. And you experience this around Qumran, right? Qumran, maybe where the Essenes lived, maybe where John the Baptist lived, before we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. In Qumran, there's not even sand, it's just rock. And yet it's one of the most powerful and rich and holy places. I think this is why people like John the Baptist would move out there. Say, I want to commune to God. I want to get away from all the distractions. But also, you're living on a place that looks like the moon, right? Mars. I'm in this stark, visceral place, this land that calls out something profound. Or the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee is beautiful. Lou, Jim, what did you guys notice when you went to the church of the Mount, the Sermon on the Mount? What do you remember about it, Jim?
It's the chapel of Beatitudes.
Yeah, the chapel of Beatitudes, yeah. You remember anything about it? Tell you what I remember.
Yeah, I mean, I remember some of my interactions with people there, but.
Here's what I remember about it.
Hillside.
It's on the hillside. It overlooks this lake. It's gorgeous. What I remember is the sound of birds. What I remember are the flowers. I mean, nuns run it, so nuns keep it good, looking good. But it's just flowers. They're so beautiful all the time. And there's so many birds because of the flowers and the trees. You walk out, you think this feels like the Garden of Eden. This feels like the creation itself, right? And so this is where Jesus preached to his people about the Sermon on the Mount. And you can't imagine a more beautiful place to hear that story. And this is where Jesus lived and hung out. Of course, the Romans, this is like Caesarea Maritima. The Romans were also actively building port cities to try to like build up trade through the Middle East. But you do have the Mediterranean Ocean. You do have the Mediterranean Ocean right there that is gorgeous. And even if it's scary, and even if it's, frightening, it is good, powerful, to the glory of God. And so Jesus uses a lot of metaphors to call out nature because that's what people can identify with. So when Jim and I were in Pakistan a couple of years ago, one of the things that really resonated with me, we were driving through a lot of wheat fields where people just had a small sickle in their hand and were threshing and cutting the wheat. And they're putting into bales, and then they're going to thresh it after that, I suppose, and then we saw people who were sorting the wheat from the chaff, they're throwing it up in the air and the wind blows. And you see a big pile of the chaff on one side where it's just blowing right there. And it's this really visceral experience where the gospel makes sense when Jesus comes and says, unless a head of wheat dies, it cannot be reborn. It's like, that's an image that they would get. If you're out in the wheat field all day long, threshing wheat and cutting wheat, and all of a sudden somebody comes and gives you that metaphor. Yeah, I get resurrection. I understand new life. I know what it means to die and be reborn because that's my business every day, right? So the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. Psalm 23, one of the most beautiful, rich psalms of all time. It doesn't make a ton of sense to us because we're not pastors. In that sense, we're not, shepherds, but we still love it because we can project ourselves there. But to the people who actually were shepherds, I think it could be so much more rich and profound to people who actually do live with sheep every single day. As a matter of fact, I preached at a Methodist church, and they said, we want it long. It was Methodist church, but it was in West Alabama, so it was really a Baptist church. And said, we don't want your 10 minutes open. We average 45 minutes. So I preached on this one line, the Lord is my shepherd, for 45 minutes. It's like, well, let's break it down. What does it really mean to be a shepherd? What is it actually like to shepherd sheep? And here are the things, here are the 5 things, it's really hard about being a shepherd. The sheep are stupid, the sheep wander off, the sheep follow the leader, the sheep are prone to infection and disease, the sheep will drink bad water, the sheep will do things intentionally against their own best interest. If you were a shepherd, I wouldn't have to preach at you for 45 minutes about how hard it is to be a shepherd. You would know in a way that's much deeper. To say, and yet, the Lord is my shepherd. It's not so much harder. Ben, if Jesus Christ was walking with you and said, the Lord is my banker. You know so much better. And maybe I should preach that for us.
Very good.
The Lord is my banker. Yeah, Joel Osteen pointed the market on.
Yeah.
But oh, I get it because I'm a banker and I know what it actually means to go to the bank every day and do banking work and to be in the system. Where, when I tell my daughter, Ben's a banker, it's like, oh, he works with big, large amounts of money every day. He's like Scrooge McDuck, where he just spends and pulls the cash. That's about it. I think of all the metaphors that Jesus uses. Well, let's see. Think of all the metaphors Jesus uses. I'm the true vine. I'm the bread of life, the good shepherd, the living water, salt of the earth, light of the world. What other metaphor does he give for himself out of nature? What am I missing? Oh, the mustard seed. Faith is like a mustard seed that grows up the money bush. Or the gardener, right? He said, look, the different soil types. There's the rocky soil. There's the soil with weeds in. There's the soil, the shallow soil. And then there's the good soil. Now look, I just put in my tomatoes. Anybody else put in your garden yet? Nice. What'd you put in?
We got, we're starting small.
Okay.
We have blueberry bush.
Okay.
We've got some tomatoes and we have some basil.
You're on your way for really interesting tomato salad.
Yes.
Did you put in your stuff yet? Or was that you? Did you put in your?
Tomatoes, English peas, string beans, carrots, and beets.
Nice. Love fresh beets. Love. My wife Katie just put in.
Or okra, that'll come later.
Okra. Katie just put in yard long, Thai green beans. And we've tried this before. It's I don't even know what to do with them because you just break them in half. You can't eat a yard long. If a bean comes this long, it's still impossible to eat. So you still have to cut it into normal sizes. And so I don't know why she goes, but I'm out there getting my hands dirty in the soil and it's fun, and it's rich, and you're connecting with the earth. It feels right. And there's nothing like eating the earth fresh tomato. Now, $200 worth of soil and seed and manure to produce, 50-cent tomato. But man, that tomato's good, isn't it? But it makes sense why Jesus is giving these. I think I lift my eyes to the mountains, to the hills. And where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. If you want to hear song of creation, read the Psalms. The Psalms use these metaphors of creation again and again and again. You know, I think of my grandfather, Jack Benasco, when he got out of World War II, it was a traumatic experience. He had a very profound experience of God in the middle of the Battle of Midway. It's like ships are sinking and everything's exploding. He said, if I ever make it out of your life, I'm going to go to the hills of West Virginia and be a friend of man. He's like, this is my commitment to God. So he got out of World War II and he moved to the hills, where his view from the back porch wasn't wholly dissimilar to this, where he built on the back of his house, this kind of on second story, and way up high, a very high house. We had a grocery store, it was very high. And but he built this outdoor porch where you could sit and just see the hills every day. And it's hard not to go out in the morning and drink tea and coffee and not experience something of the glory of God just coming off the mountains of West Virginia, where you just sit and experience something visceral and say, I want to be a friend to man. But it always reminded me of this psalm. I lift my eyes to the hills. You know, from whence does my help come? Where you think of Moses, how connected the story of Moses is to the visceral reality of the desert, the life in the desert. The first thing that happens is an east wind blows for hours and pushes the Red Sea and splits the Red Sea, right? The first thing that happens is you're walking through on dry ground, not even in mud. You're walking through on dry ground and seeing Pharaoh's army washed away. My friends, the Jews just celebrated Passover for 8 days, remembering this event, the cataclysmic, earth-shattering event of God separating the Red Sea. But you think of manna from heaven. You wake up every morning and you find fields of manna all around you in every direction. Or the ravens coming down to provide meat for the Israelites. Or even the raging river coming out of a rock, right? When you're thirsty in the desert, obviously God produces this river of water. I mean, each one of these, you know, we can make it as a caricature. But you think of like what it is to be viscerally in that presence when you wake up in the morning and you come out of your tent and there's food everywhere. There's wafer-like substance covering the ground, and you're gathering it in your hands, and you're gathering it in baskets, and it's visceral. You think of like all these ravens arrive. They don't arrive as food. They don't arrive as hamburgers. You have to get the raven, hurry its neck, take off. You know, you have to process it yourself. It's a visceral experience. There's a connection to it. Or even this raging river, where it says Moses hit the rock, and it's not a little trickle. It's enough to feed 1 million horses and people who are gathering at its banks to drink the water, right? I mean, I think like, look, nature itself cries out the glory of God. He says, if these people were silent, even the stones would cry. That for centuries, for millennia, Christians say this isn't the end, and it's not the fullness. But to experience God in nature is a beginning. And like all good things that begin, maybe that should be your launching pad to something more. Jesus Christ is the fullness of God. This is a way to taste a little bit. And so when people say, I experience God in nature, I'm not really that put out. It's like, that's a good start. But that's like saying, you know, to me, it's like, oh, I like to eat, and so I eat Lunchables. It's like, well, you're starting, that is technically food. But you can go so much more than that. Like, that's a good place to start when you're a baby, or it's like, oh, I like to eat pureed peas. It's like, okay, that is how our children start in this life. But they don't stop there. And if all you ever ate were pureed peas, you're going to be missing out on a lot. But it does exist. So I'd say, like, yes, go experience God in nature. I mean, I think this is why a lot of places where you go on retreat are nature-based. You go to Camp McDowell, if you go to, I don't know, in Kentucky, if you go hang out with the Trappist monks, there's going to be a component of being in nature, whether working on the farm or in the garden or just being outside. A lot of monasteries are built in really beautiful places. Where in Greece, if you go to Greece, you go to Meteora. Meteora are these insane rocks in the middle of nowhere. And the Christians were building their monasteries on those insane rocks. They said it's for protection, but it's really, I think, out of ego. Because why would you want to build a really awesome monastery at the base of a rock when you could build one on top of a really amazing one? And so, I mean, I think go experience God in nature and keep going. What are your thoughts, reactions, feedback?
I think a lot of times, you know, when you're out in nature,